We welcome you to the first of two lectures for the 2012 Artist Lecture Series, Faculty Invited Address. Dr. Mark Zajack will be presenting this morning, and then in the spring semester, Dr. Kitty Grace. We welcome you and thank you for coming. You note that I brought an orange folder for Clemson today, so. It is with a great deal of joy and pleasure, and yes, Mark, happiness, that I introduce my beloved friend and colleague, Mark Zajack, PhD, Assistant Professor of Psychology here at Hastings College. 4 years ago, when the Psychology Department was preparing for the retirement of my longtime friend and colleague, Chuck Eichenberg, I suggested to my colleagues that we need to hire an industrial organizational psychologist as an important and vital addition to the department, to the college, and to the community. Industrial organizational psychology has been a hot field for some time. Several years ago, I was able to place 5 students in the IO graduate program at UNO when they only accepted 10 students nationally. I have 2 former students at a PhD program now, including my son Ben. Mark is going to place many more in the future. With so many students going into IO psychology, I felt that we needed a top-notch person to teach the classes that I had been teaching, plus to add new offerings to our course, such as motivation. We needed a professor trained in industrial organizational psychology. Fortunately for all of us in the college, the department, the community, we found that remarkable person in Mark Zajack. He came to us with a tremendous bonus package for Hastings College and the larger Hastings community, his dynamic, socially engaged, and marathon runner and partner wife, Lorna, and his inquisitive and charming daughter, Hazel. I asked Hazel to comment on her daddy so I could include her remarks in my introduction today, and she replied, "I love my daddy, and in the summertime, Daddy comes to the pool to be with me." Hazel then told Lorna, "Mommy, you're not as funny as Daddy. Daddy tells funny jokes." Mark earned his PhD in Industrial Organizational Psychology in 2010 from Clemson University, an MS in IO from San Jose State in 2005, and a BA from Colgate University in 1995. Before coming to Hastings College, he served as an instructor and a research assistant in the Department of Psychology at Clemson University. Dr. Zajack has worked as a consultant for assessment and selection, Connects Incorporated, creating situational judgment, biodata, cognitive ability, and data interpretation terms for multiple client validation studies. In addition, Mark has worked as a statistical analysis intern for Football Outsiders Incorporated. He was responsible for organizing and updating the NFL player and team data for use in statistical analysis. The football players and football fans among us will be interested to know that Mark conducted research to study the effect of age on NFL player performance by each position. Mark also worked as a knowledge management analyst for Oracle PeopleSoft. Before that, he was senior consultant at PeopleSoft, where he planned, structured, and executed data mapping and conversion. Dr. Mark Zajack has 3 peer-reviewed and edited publications, 6 refereed conference presentations, and presently has 6 research articles as works in progress moving towards publication. Dr. Zajack, or Mark as he prefers to be addressed, is an outstanding classroom teacher. His student and colleague evaluations are among the highest and strongest at Hastings College. If you were to take one glance at his scores on his student evaluations, you would think that his wife Lorna or daughter Hazel filled them out for him. They are simply spectacular. As a colleague in the psychology department, Mark's in-depth knowledge of data analysis, group dynamics, motivation, Moneyball, and organizational development are simply invaluable. Mark is a good leveler in the department, sitting back analyzing information and conversations, then offering a witty, pertinent comment that leads us to focus on the central issue and then points us toward an agreeable resolution. Mark, you'd be a good candidate for being a dean someday. Not only is Mark an excellent teacher, he's a great contributor to the campus community. In his 5 short semesters at Hastings College, Mark has served on the Teacher Education Policy Committee, the Graduate Council, the Wellness Committee, the Inauguration Committee, the President's Advisory Council as faculty advisor to Psychi, the National Honorary Society in Psychology, and has served as chairperson of the Social Science Division for 2 years. Mark's primary research interests focus on occupational stress, productivity, and employee well-being. His academic interests have been informed by his experience as a business analyst and consultant. One might wonder why Mark left the enterprising and profitable world of business consulting I found the answer from his wife, Lorna, when she wrote to me. I can picture this day so clearly. It was about 8 years ago. We were living in California and we were walking into our apartment when Mark said to me, I always knew I would go back to school. We had met during the senior year of college, had been together for years, were already married, but this was totally news to me. At that time, Mark was a software consultant for a great company, and I, writes Lorna, was organizing golf tournaments. We were playing a ton of golf and had just been discussing finally getting him new golf clubs since I had basically been given an awesome new set of Callaways and was loving them. So instead of the new golf clubs, Mark chose to buy a desk, which he studied at for the GREs, applied for graduate school at, wrote his dissertation at, and applied for a job as a professor. We still have the desk. And finally this summer, thanks to Brett Erickson, he got his new golf clubs this summer. Again, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Mark Zajack, a very humble person who is probably embarrassed by this glowing but accurate introduction. His address is entitled Data plus Choice equals Happiness, exploring the relationship between decision-making and well-being. Here's the Moneyball expert, Mark Zajack.
Thank you to Lee. Thanks to Lee for the introduction. At this point, I should probably just say good night, have a good weekend. I'm not going to top that. So on to the talk. Thanks to the students and faculty for selecting me to speak, and hopefully you won't regret it. I've had the privilege of attending 4 of these invited faculty lectures since I've been at Hastings College. Bob Amio, Carter Aiken, Tom Krieger, and Ben Waller. And all 4 of these lectures were outstanding. When I was sitting in the audience, I was thinking, wow, this would be fun to do at some point. So the first lesson of my lecture is be careful what you wish for. And also we're going to talk about success rates. So with that in mind, Hastings College, 4 out of 5 isn't bad. You know, that's a pretty good success rate for these lectures. All right, so we're going to talk about a little bit about motivation. I'm going to back up. I'm going to quiet down. We're going to talk a lot about choice, and we're going to also talk about the outcomes of our decisions. How can we make good decisions? So one good question to ask about decisions is, can we trust our intuition? Is our intuition going to steer us toward the right choice? And with that in mind, I'll tell you a little story. It was the evening of November the 15th, 2009. I was staying at a hotel the night before an interview at a small liberal arts college. The chair of the department was, not to give anything away, some chair of some department was kind enough to meet me for dinner the night before, and then I had some free time before the interview festivities the next day. And I wondered, what should I do? Should I study my PowerPoints? Well, my PowerPoints were on occupational stress, and I knew you shouldn't stress too much. So I wondered, should I prepare for interview questions? What if they asked me a hard one? Like, what is your favorite color? Blue, no, red. Sorry. Monty Python fans out there. So instead I decided to do some research. I watched Sunday Night Football. I call it research. It was a game between the Patriots and the Colts. It was fourth down for the Patriots with 2 minutes to go. They were up by 6 points at their own 29-yard line. And Bill Belichick, the coach of the Patriots, had a choice to make. Would he punt or would he go for it? He got a lot of feedback on that decision. He went for it. He took a chance. It didn't work out. And the media, the Patriots fans, pretty much the whole country piled on and said, that was a stupid choice. So being the geek that I am, I wondered, was that really a stupid choice, and how do we know? So we'll get back to that later. I also had a decision to make after the next day's festivities at the small liberal arts college, and we'll come back to that later as well. So here was the situation for Bill Belichick. Did he take a chance and go for it? Some research on how we decide how we figure out what decisions we're going to make. Kahneman and Tversky have done research on what they call automatic or controlled decisions, System 1 or System 2 decisions. We make decisions every day. Some of you had to decide whether to get out of bed this morning. Hopefully you're not regretting that already. And Kahneman and Tversky talk about times when you make quick, intuitive judgments or you make slow, careful decisions. So instead of System 1 and System 2, I'll refer to them as intuitive and deliberate throughout this presentation. Intuitive decisions are enabled by heuristics, shortcuts. They're quick decisions that were evolutionarily made to make. But these decisions can also result in bias or error. So why do we call it bias? We don't say it just to be pedantic. That's probably part of the reason. But the term bias refers to a consistent tendency to err in a specific direction. Intuition can be both accurate and biased. So how do we know when we're making a decision whether we should use intuition or whether we should make a controlled, deliberate decision? And how do we know what we really want? There's no point in assessing how to make better decisions if the entire exercise is choosing between things that maybe we shouldn't even be striving for. And that brings us to our next slide. Why isn't my presentation entitled Data plus Choice equals Money? We have some interesting research on that. Kahneman and Deaton in 2010 found that income only affects happiness up to an annual income of about $75,000. Incomes that increase beyond that level have no effect on measures of one's daily emotional well-being. And 75,000, the number 75,000 may be even lower in certain areas with certain costs of living. Similar research has been done before. A researcher named Biggie Smalls examined this relationship. This was not included in the study. This is part of your liberal arts education. I could have quoted Plato or Aristotle. But let's look at what someone else has to say about decisions. If you don't know who Kenny Loggins is, perhaps you've never been to the danger zone. So in the 80s, Kenny Loggins was the king of movie theme songs. I'm All Right from Caddyshack, Footloose from Footloose, and Danger Zone from Top Gun. So Kenny's back out touring, doing private corporate shows to pay the bills after hitting financial trouble. And this is what Kenny has to say to us. If you think stardom is the answer to your problems, you're sadly mistaken. And if you can do something other than this, you should. I watch American Idol with all these kids who think being a star is going to solve their problems. And I think, you expletive idiot. Stardom is good if you want a nice table or a ticket to a show, but it's not a free pass around all the problems of being human. And it can cripple you if it hits too young. So am I here to crush your dreams? No, that's just Kenny Loggins. But my point is that if we rely too much on intuition, we can make some of these same mistakes in our decision making. So let's use a more traditional liberal arts example. In a 1981 paper, Kahneman and Tversky described a similar perspective regarding how we need to refrain to make from intuitive decisions. And they talked about Homer's Odyssey, where, apologies to the classic scholars as I butcher this, but I did read the Odyssey as part of my liberal arts education, and that was a long time ago. So Odysseus is sailing past the island of where the sirens are, and he has to resist their calls. So all of his crew members cover their ears, and Odysseus wants to hear the sirens call, so he ties himself to the mast of the ship. And maybe this is a metaphor for our decision making, that sometimes, rather than making the immediate intuitive decision, we must tie ourselves to the mast of the ship. I won't make a joke about that. So let's trot out a few theories of decision making. The law of least effort is exactly what it sounds like. If possible, we prefer to exert the least effort when making a decision. Is this lazy? Maybe it's just evolutionary efficiency. But if we have intuitive heuristics that can effectively guide our decisions, then great. Why exert more effort than necessary? A demonstration of this law was found in an odd place, chess. I think of chess as a very deliberate game where you think as many moves ahead as you can. So the researchers, Simon and Chase, had the same sort of hypothesis, that the grandmasters in chess would think many moves ahead, and that would result in their superior decision-making in chess. Well, it turns out that wasn't true. They found two important differences between very good and grandmaster chess players. Grandmasters had near perfect recall of the entire board after only 5 seconds of looking at it. So if I take that board away, can you tell me where every piece is? No, neither can I. But this only works for grandmasters if the board is arranged in a way that makes sense in a chess game. If you randomly arrange pieces, they can't remember it after only looking at it for 5 seconds. The second finding from the study was that eye tracking software showed grandmasters look at the best move first and then look at alternative moves. So how do they do this? It's from their experience. It's from their long-term memory. From knowing what a typical chessboard looks like, they intuitively know what the best move is. And the rest of us who don't have that database of experience can't necessarily do that. So it's not deliberation, it's intuition. Some of you may have heard of the book Blink, and a lot of you hopefully have read it. It's a great book, and Malcolm Gladwell points out a lot of situations where we make good snap decisions, good intuitive decisions in very little time. And the examples are like our examples from the grandmasters in chess. A few years pass, and Gladwell writes Outliers. Outliers talks about the value of experience. Having 10,000 hours of experience in a field makes you an expert, makes you more likely to be like the chess grandmasters, enable you via intuition to leap to the right answer first. So if intuition is great, can we all become experts? Can we use it more often? Well, often we think we're experts where we're not. Gladwell points out an example of tall CEOs. In the general American population, 3.9% of adult men are 6'2" and taller, whereas 30% of CEOs are 6'2" and taller, which, of course, reminds me of a Caddyshack quote. Judge asks Ty, "What did you shoot today?" "Oh, Judge, I don't keep score." "Then how do you measure yourself with other golfers?" "By height." And I think height is perfectly fine for judging a lecturer. However, perhaps it's not the best criteria for choosing a CEO. Unless you need a CEO to get things off of high shelves, there are probably other qualities that you should look for. So other ways our intuition steer us wrong. Dan O'Reilly has done a lot of great research on this topic. And he says that we're predictably irrational when we use our intuition, that there are so many occasions when our intuition steers us wrong. Of course, he can't quite make up his mind about it either. His next book was The Upside of Irrationality, so maybe being irrational is okay. But we'll go with the theme of when we're irrational. He did a study. He had people rate appearance. And he talks about, when he talks about this study, he talks about Tom versus Jerry being both attractive, and then he makes an ugly version of Jerry and an ugly version of Tom to see if it'll change people's preferences. So in this case, he used actual people. In this case, this is photoshopped, and people chose Jerry when ugly Jerry was around, when they were presented Form A. But people chose Tom to be more attractive when ugly Tom was around. So even with something we think we're evolutionarily adapted to make the best attractiveness choice for mate, it just depends on our context. It depends on other choices. Okay, so when does this come up in other ways? When we walk into 7-Eleven, apparently. Pierre Chandon, who's French, so he probably has something against our soft drink consumption. He did a study comparing quantities in soft drinks. The bottle on the left is an 8-ounce Coke, and he had people rate how big do you think the other Cokes are. I guess we can't really turn this into a game show. I'll tell you. 22 ounces, 40 ounces, and 50 ounces relative to that 8-ounce bottle. People didn't realize how much Coke they were getting in the shape of the cup that they chose. And this has been, people generally estimate that there's about 30% less liquid than is actually there. And it happens in studies with jelly beans, popcorn, ice cream, and alcohol. So why don't we estimate these portion sizes well? Well, maybe it's volume. And also, our choices that are present affect, what's present affects our choices. So with the general upsizing of drinks lately, people still order a medium thinking I'm going to get a medium amount of soda, and now that medium is much larger. We also tend to anticipate every sip of soda will be exactly like the first one, exactly as pleasurable. And it turns out it's not. That first sip of soda is not like the 200th sip, like the 2000th sip. If you eat enough ice cream, eventually that curve goes down and it's just plain misery. You should try it. All right, just try it for fun. But eventually that green curve is going to say, this isn't fun anymore. I've had enough. And our intuition doesn't really realize that at the time. Don't try this with alcohol either. Okay, so what's 37 times 24? All right, while you're doing that, which snack would you like? When this experiment was done, people are engaged in their system 2, engaged in deliberate thought. Intuition, what does intuition say? Give me the cake. Give me some sugar. Thank you. Calculator. But yeah, I didn't want to leave you hanging, so 888, there we go. So yes, if we're engaged in our deliberate thought, we make an intuitive decision even regarding our food. Okay, so are predictions really that bad? How about predicting our future happiness? A question that might come up to someone like me is, how happy will I be if I get tenure? Dan Gilbert and his colleagues studied an example of this, and virtually every junior faculty member predicted, once I get tenure, I'll be elated, I'll be happy, it'll last forever. And in reality, within a few months, they were right back to where they started. The same level of happiness, they weren't less happy, but the effect wore off. And it happens to us with other things. If you get a new iPhone, the shiny new effect of the iPhone tends to wear off over time, and you get inured to that pleasure. So a few years ago, I did a study. I wondered how good were NFL expert predictions? How good were they at predicting the future? Can we trust their expertise? So in 2008, I collected some predictions off the internet, kind of randomly selected. And here's what I looked at. What was the expert prediction with the wins that they were trying to predict? And if you look at that 0.75 correlation, you think, hey, that's pretty good. These experts know what they're talking about. Unfortunately, that was the correlation with the year before. With the year that they were trying to predict, 2008, their correlation was 0.2. Their correlation was tiny. So what did they do on these expert predictions, these intuitive predictions? They predicted what happened the year before. They anchored to that previous outcome. I wondered if I could just make a systematic prediction, a dumb prediction using stats that would be just as good. So my dumb model had an average of 2.7 wins different from each of the actual games won for each team. And all the experts had greater differences. So you might be wondering, what's this dumb model? Should I take it to Vegas? Maybe not. It's really, really simple. It just basically says teams will regress to the mean. That teams that won, if a team goes undefeated, they won 16 games, well, maybe they'll win about 12 next year. If you care about the formula, it's just taking half of that difference between the average amount of wins, 8 wins, and reducing it. Bad teams will get a little better, just by random luck. And that prediction tends to outpredict most experts, which is sad. I feel bad for those experts. So what other theories do we have that will help us with our decision making? Let's talk about prospect theory. It's a little bit confusing, so rather than taking you through that graph and what does this curve mean and this curve mean, let's just do a simple exercise. Do you want to accept this gamble? Heads you win $1,500, tails you lose $1,000. We'll just play once. Who wants to do it? When we ask people, there are a few, Mark Hall in the back, math, of course, he's going to accept. Most people, via their intuition, say, no, I do not want to accept this gamble. It's not worth the risk of losing $1,000 to make $1,500. And that's prospect theory. We should treat these two gambles the same, but we don't. We tend to, by intuition, treat losses as 2 times greater in pain than gains in pleasure. And like I said, it's kind of confusing, so let's go to another example. But before we go to that example, let's talk about how we should compute it. Rather than use prospect theory, we should use expected utility theory. We should take the knowledge from our economist forefathers that say, look at probability, look at the value of the outcome. That's how you should decide. That's how you should deliberate over this decision and decide which choice to make. So here's our next choice. Would you like to receive $1 million? So you can just choose that and move on. 100% of the time you get $1 million. Or you can take choice B. 89% of the time you get $1 million, 10% of the time you get 2.5, and 1% of the time you receive nothing. How about this one? Choice A or B? I hear some B's. And if you're working out the math works out to B. But what would influence you to choose A? Yeah, I just gave up $1 million, that perception of loss of $1 million. And again, when this experiment is done, most people choose A. They're like, just give me the money. But it's all hypothetical. Well, what if we change around the options a little bit? What if we put 100 poker chips in a bag? The red ones are worth $1 million. The blue ones can be worth 2.5 million in the B scenario, can also be worth $1 million. And then for the white chips, you can see them on the bottom of your slide. In bag B, the white chip is worth nothing. And in bag A, the white chip is worth $1 million. In this scenario, which one do you choose? B looks pretty good, right? Are these scenarios any different? They're absolutely no different. It just depends on the context. Here you can see the gain from the 2.5 million, whereas in the previous example, you just saw a loss of giving up $1 million. Okay, so how can you actually use this in your real life? If you're making a decision, I'm going to advocate spreadsheets. I'm a geek, what can I say? I'm going to advocate figuring out the probability of an option, figuring out how much you like an option, using objective data to choose an option. So actually, when I've made a few decisions in my life, as sad as it is to say, I've used spreadsheets. When I chose my grad school, I looked at, okay, what's the cost? How good is the location? How many advisors would I be willing to work with? What do the current students say in objective ratings of their satisfaction? And how close is it to a golf course? Maybe I shouldn't have put that in. But my wife was working in golf. That was for her. I'm giving. But yeah, can you make this decision with deliberation and objectivity rather than subjectivity, is the point. So shout out to Jake and a bunch of other people, Michael O'Neill, guys who did some work in J-term on March Madness. So can we predict really difficult to predict events with this deliberate model? So at the bottom you can see a model that we came up with. I've since tweaked and made it more complicated, who knows why, that predicts how NCAA teams will do in March Madness. And how did it do? Over the past 10 years, this model was made before the tournament last year. Over the past 10 years, it's only predicted the champion 3 times, 30% success rate. That doesn't sound very good. It got Kentucky right last year, but Kentucky was the favorite. We'll compare it to another measure like the RPI. The RPI has never gotten it right in the past 10 years. Is it any good? How do we know if it's any good? I'll give you some more metrics. You can judge if this is any good. Again, 42.5% doesn't sound very good, but if we compare it to just RPI and seeding, the model's not bad. And if we have time at the end, I can tell you how to use this model to you could definitely use it to beat experts, but it's unclear if you could use it to win your pool. There are a couple strategies you could use. But anyway, the point is it's a linear model, and it does outperform some metrics, and it does outperform some experts. So when should you use a linear model? When would it make sense not to trust your intuition? Well, if you can somehow quantify the decision, consider a couple of variables. There's been research that has compared these statistical models to expert judgments, and it's outperformed the expert judgments the majority of the time if you consider a couple of variables, and really if probability estimates are necessary. I won't go into it, but we don't estimate probability very well at all, which is evidenced by the lottery. Okay, so let's talk about Moneyball. This is a scene in Moneyball where scouts are sitting around a table trying to decide who to draft. And it seems like the scouts are using their intuition. Why do I say that? Brad Pitt's character, Billy Beane, the general manager of the Oakland A's, asks, "How about Perez?" A scout replies, "He's got an ugly girlfriend. An ugly girlfriend means no confidence." So is that how you should draft your team? So I wonder, is that Hollywood? What did the scout actually say? They'd gotten some scouts together. Michael Lewis's book is a nonfiction book. It turns out the scout really said, an ugly girlfriend means bad eyesight. So if he has bad eyesight, we shouldn't draft him. Yeah. So it's just as bad. I can't clean that up for you. So are there better ways to make these decisions? Let's take an example of from football. If you're drafting a defensive lineman, do you want to look for long arms? Do you want to look for strength? Do you want to look for speed? We have all these ideas about what makes a good defensive lineman, but how many of them are backed up by data? So another J-term shout out, Tyler and Braulio put together some college stats for defensive linemen, and we analyzed whether their college statistics like sacks and tackles or their combine statistics like 40-yard dash would predict their performance in the NFL, and just compare that to the order they were drafted. What did the NFL experts say about them? So the statistical model, the data that these guys gathered, showed that 40-yard dash and college sacks are actually really good predictors of how well the player will do in the NFL. It makes sense. And that was significant. There was not a significant relationship between NFL performance and the order in which they were drafted, which is a little bit scary. This is a big difference. NFL GMs would be better off just using two stats, ignoring everything else they know about the player, never watching any tape. And yeah, so this is scary. So I figured we could get a time machine, send these guys back to the 2005 draft, and ask, who would you pick? Marcus Spears or Justin Tuck in the first round? Knowing what we know about the metrics, you should probably take Justin Tuck. The Cowboys drafted Marcus Spears 20th overall. Justin Tuck was drafted 74th overall. So teams aren't necessarily looking for the right metrics for who to draft. Okay, this is the part where we probably move quickly. Let's get back to the fourth down decision. Let's get back to how we would know if Bill Belichick made the right choice when he decided to go for it on fourth down. And it's all about having the right data. David Romer, an economist at UC Berkeley, in 2002 and then in 2005 did a couple of papers on fourth down decisions and how NFL coaches, it turns out they're too timid. He used just a couple data points. What are the expected points you would gain from having a first down at a certain point on the field? So from the 50-yard line, if you have a first down, you can expect to gain on average 2 points. If your opponent has a first down on the 50-yard line, you expect to lose on average about 2 points. If we use that information along with, well, what's the probability you'll make a 4th and 2? If it's 50%, we can compute that and see, okay, should we go for it and should we not go for it? I'll spare you the math, but in Belichick's example, he should have gone for it. Even when we take into consideration time left in the game, it was a good decision to go for it. So you're probably getting close to asking, why do we care? And I'm getting there. Unless you're all planning to be football coaches, you're like, come on, give me something else. Well, how do coaches view gains? What's worth more, 7 touchdowns or 3 field goals? They're the same, right? 21 points. You guys are really good at math. You figured that out. But in the intuitive view of prospect theory, field goals feel like you're gaining more because those small incremental gains make a difference. If I gave you the choice, if you're going to win an award, you can win 2 $100 awards, one each semester, and we'll have a big ceremony for you, or you can win one $200 award. People choose the 2 awards. They want those small gains that make them feel good. And that's the same thing with football coaches. They want the 7 field goals instead of taking the chance and going for the 3 touchdowns, when really the points should all count the same. So back to the Colts-Patriots game, up by 6, 2 minutes to go, 4th and 2. Do you punt? No, you shouldn't punt. Are you going to be wrong some of the time? Absolutely, and you're going to lose the game. If you think of it as one decision, you might think of the law of small numbers if you're really nerdy. You might think, well, this is like one flip of a coin, anything can happen. But what if you're making those decisions throughout your career? Does it have any effect on your success in your career? I wondered that, so I ran some numbers. A lot of numbers here, but we're looking at the career success of coaches, how often they go for it on 4th down, that's the go for it rate, in an opponent's territory. And so we have timid coaches in the top, aggressive coaches at the bottom. It's probably time for a shout out to Bill Parcells. People know who Bill Parcells is, NFL coach. 1964, his first coaching job was at Hastings College, linebacker coach. And by the way, he started his football career at Colgate University, my alma mater. What does that have to do with this? Nothing at all. But if we look at the success of the least aggressive versus the most aggressive coaches and just pick something like Super Bowls, these are coaches that have been successful. I pared it down to coaches that have only had over 250 chances on 4th down in opponent territory. 9 of the least aggressive coaches have appeared in the Super Bowl, only 1 win out of those 9 appearances, 11 appearances for the aggressive coaches, and 8 wins. So you might see a difference. It's a small sample, but you might see a difference in aggressiveness. So if I make an unwarranted prediction, I'm going to say in 10, 15 years, you're going to keep seeing those 4th down aggressiveness rates go up, even to the point that there are a few coaches like Kevin Kelly, a high school coach in Arkansas, who goes for it on every 4th down. He does not have a punter on his team. He wouldn't know what to do if they needed to punt. 4th and 20 from your own 5, we're going for it. We're going to take a chance, and we're going to go for it every time. And guess what the other opponent starts thinking? I just wish they'd punt. I wish they'd punt once. So when should you surrender your intuition? When should you tie yourself to the mast? First, when you have time. If you have an emergency decision, don't make a spreadsheet. That was obvious, wasn't it? I didn't need to tell you that. Also, when the variables are quantifiable. If you can't put it into numbers, how can you make a linear model? How can you make a careful decision? If the variables are on different scales, you should definitely use a deliberate model. We don't do well managing what does GRE score and GPA mean and how do we put them together. We need to put them on the same scale. If there are a ton of variables you're considering, and if you're not an expert, if you don't have that 10,000 hours of experience. So some of you are thinking, wait, you promised to make me happier. And you just told me to use a spreadsheet. I'm not happy. This is not the old switcheroo. This is just the best strategy I know to make good decisions. Deliberation takes effort, but it does help in the long run. A lot of people talk about our happiness being on a hedonic treadmill. There's a big advantage to being able to make good choices so we can get off the hedonic treadmill, to figuring out what we should be after. And this is closely related to the idea that we have a set point of happiness that we're just born with. Our happiness, on average, if we win the lottery, it'll go up, but then it'll slowly sink back down to our original level of happiness that we just innately have. I think there are some decisions, some wise decisions, that can get us off this hedonic treadmill. This isn't one of them. Research shows that money, chasing money, is just going to beget more chasing money, staying on the treadmill. A study by Fidelity Investments found that 42% of millionaires reported feeling not wealthy. They experienced stress due to the thought that they would outlive their assets. And their assets, their investable liquid assets, were $3.5 million on average. 42% not happy. So if those people are worried about money, what about the rest of us? Is there any hope? But we have that study that tells us that once you reach $75,000, more money doesn't really help us much. So maybe Biggie Smalls was right. So what sort of research can help us on happiness? Sonia Lyubomirsky gives us what she called the 40% solution. That, yes, 50% of our happiness is just kind of genetically determined. It's our set point. It's not going to change. But 40% is based on our choices, our things that we can do. And only 10% is based on our circumstances. So that 10% is things like, do you live in California? We think we'd be happier if we lived in California. Californians think they're happier. Studies show that they're actually not on a day-to-day basis. You kind of forget you're in California and you go out to your job, and then you go home, and then people have TV in California. They watch the same thing we do. So what's the 40%? Intentional activities, deliberate choices, choices you can make, things that will make you happy in the long run. And perhaps the idea of why you're making those choices, why you're doing what you're doing. So things like sleep and exercise are good, but so is exercising your autonomy, your power of choice, feeling you have a purpose in life. So I know I subjected you to a lot of football, and for that I apologize. But here's the payoff, the cheesy metaphor you've been waiting for. Can I say this? We're all our own football coaches. When left to our instincts, we focus on losses. We punt the ball and settle for field goals. But more often what we should be doing is ignoring the losses when we can, going for the big gain, going for the touchdown, if you really want to stick with the metaphor, but taking that chance. And what we find is that when people strive for a meaningful goal, even when they don't make it, they're happier for the effort. That we get over our adversity very, very quickly. Okay, so to end with, I guess you probably figured out the other choice I made on November 15th, 2009. That when I came to visit a small liberal arts college, I had a choice to come here and teach. And guess what? It made me happy. So defying prospect theory, I made a deliberate choice. I'm happy to be here. And believe it or not, I didn't do it for the money. So thank you. Unfortunately, we have time for questions. So does anyone have any questions? Don't just run off to Vegas with these models from sports. It's not that easy. Nancy? Why did I pick this topic? I felt like it was, I'm interested in a lot of different areas of psychology. You'll notice I didn't talk a lot about workplace studies. And that's kind of my general focus. And one thing I've learned about motivation in the workplace is sometimes when you feel like you have to do something, it's not as much fun. And so the sports stuff, no one pays me for. Actually, when I did an internship and I got paid for it and I helped publish a book, it felt like more work, and it's fun to do the sports analysis and then tie it into positive psychology, because that's kind of the areas I like to dabble in.
What do you do on Sunday afternoons?
Sunday afternoons, I think this is the first year that I've effectively brainwashed my daughter Hazel to saying, today she said she can't wait till Sunday for Daddy-Daughter Day, and we get to watch football. So we'll see. Usually it means we play blocks and, and with Matchbox cars. But the football, the TV might be on. Any other questions? All right, thank you. Oh, sorry, Kyle. No, you're good. All right, thanks.